Hey guys, welcome to the newest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. This is a slightly different episode. It was recorded with the guest where we had like live attendees on the Zoom call while I was recording, and during the end, the attendees get to ask a question to the guest live. Isn't it cool? So we're gonna keep doing these AMA sessions, live AMA sessions with amazing guests in the industry. So let me know if you want to join the next AMA session. Send an email to hello@saassessions.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. All right, on this episode we have Guillaume Cabane with us, so let's get started. So hey G, welcome to the SaaS Sessions podcast. Today
Hey,
we are talking about multi-channel marketing strategy. And so, G, can you start with like a quick introduction about you?
yeah, I'm G. You want
And
to know more?
yeah, we want to know more.
I've done marketing in some shape or form and demand gen on B2B Saas companies for the past 17 years now. That's been a while across multiple companies, including Segment, Drift, and nowadays I advise high growth B2B SaaS startups.
That's
And
interesting.
I'm very passionate about growth marketing and engineering, solving demand gen problems with engineering.
That's really great. And G, welcome to the show. So we are going to talk about multi-channel marketing strategy, G, and we all know, like in this pandemic, one thing that us all marketers learned is about they are opening up as many channels as they can for acquiring leads and doing branding. There are multiple reasons, right? So market, I believe that marketers in B2B SaaS companies, the number one thing that worries about the CMOs and the VPs of marketing is the acquisition marketer, right? This type of person generally specializes only in, like on one channel of acquisition before they could step on to multi-channel acquisition. So all CMOs and VPs would want a marketer who can look all to who can look over or take care of multiple different channels, right? And setting up this acquisition strategy for different channels, and ultimately, like managing a team. So what tips do you have for someone who's planning to go from a single channel marketer to a multi-channel marketer?
I want to push back on the assumption
Mm-hmm.
that all CMOs want their teammates to be good at multiple channels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think people want to, for sure, because they want
Yeah.
to grow and they want to broaden their horizon. But I do think that there's place and there are interesting roles for people who are very specialized and extremely good at one thing. And there
Mm-hmm.
are some channels where people focus just on that. For example, um, email marketing is
Mm-hmm.
generally pretty specific, especially as the company grows, right?
Right.
And there's kind of an inverse correlation of
Mm-hmm.
how many channels you can cover and how big
Mm-hmm.
is your company.
Right.
For example, if you work at Google, you're probably not in charge of email and paid or marketing, whatever, right? Even if you
Right.
work at Adobe, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be in a team that is in charge of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's inversely correlated to the company size. Uh,
Totally.
the other thing is that as time goes by,
Mm-hmm.
um, some channels are becoming increasingly complex to
Mm-hmm.
manage, and it requires a lot more knowledge. For example, before I was very good, a long time ago, I was very good at paid. I was pretty good at SEO, and I'm very good at email. And these days, like you know,
Mm-hmm.
some of those channels have become really, really complicated, and it's hard to be extremely good at multiple channels. Okay,
Got it.
so that's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I want to push back. Now I get it. Individuals want to be on multiple channels because they want to be the next CMO, and they think like, oh, like to be a good CMO, I need to know all the channels.
Yeah.
That's a different perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendation there, however, is if you want to be good at multiple channels, you got to
Mhm.
go, as I said, in a small enough company.
Got it.
As soon as the company is too big, it's impossible to manage multiple channels. Okay,
Right.
so you got to
Mm-hmm.
go in a small enough company where you will really be the operator on those channels. And the second is that you need to be good at it. all right? Because it's easy to say that you have the ownership for multiple channels, but are you doing a good job there? All
Yeah.
right. Often, like I get that question like often, on like how like people who are wondering like what I do, and I see like Sarah Pion here is in the channel, and asked the question before, and like how do you become a good generalist? And
Mhm.
it's really hard. Like becoming or staying a good generalist is really, really hard. It means you need to be touching. It's just like some sports. You need to practice every channel on a regular basis. You just like
Right.
if you stop, you'll just lose touch completely. So being a good generalist is harder than being a good specialist.
Totally. And so that leads me to my next question, which was about this, right? So let's say if there's a journalist, so how can he start, or how can they start identifying all the different levers of a single channel, right? Brand, life cycle, funnel, metrics of a single channel, and then slowly to expand to multiple channels. How can
Mhm,
how can
mhm.
someone do this?
So let's assume that they are starting from one channel where they're good.
Hmm.
We hope that they're good at something, and
Uh-huh.
that's where they're starting.
Yeah.
um, I have an approach where like I imagine that people in marketing are generally creative, and if they're not creative enough, they can do some research and they can find what's if we take a step back as to like what are the benefits of somebody being multiple channel for the company. So we talked about the benefits for the person, which
Right.
is mainly career benefits. For the
Hmm.
company, how do you pitch that to the company? How do you sell to the company, hey, I want to expand to other channels, and that will provide the benefit? I'm going to tell you what the benefit is. Most often, the user experience is broken from one channel to another, from one step of the funnel to another. Most
Right.
like there are exceptions, but channels are very uh, they are segregated at some steps of the funnel. All
Totally.
right. So let's say paid marketing is generally top of funnel if you exclude like retargeting. Okay. SEO also. Email is generally middle to bottom of funnel. All right.
Yeah.
And if you look at what like Sarah does at Alice, it's like gifts and stuff like that. It's also like bottom of funnel.
Mhm.
Okay. Because you need to capture the address and the engagement and whatnot. Uh, if those channels are split across multiple people, multiple teams, there is less coherence, less cohesion in the message from one channel to the other. And so the experience breaks because we live in a world, especially in B2B SaaS, where there is more multi-touch. The people will experience more of your messaging, and there's a longer decision cycle.
Yeah.
And so they're just going to experience, and if those marketers on your end don't talk to each other well enough, which is often the case, then the messaging is going to be different. The
Totally.
offers might be different. Okay. And the experience is going to be crap. Sometimes it's personalized, sometimes it's not. And so,
Yeah.
of course, if one person does all of that, they can start threading, an experience that is unique, that is personalized. They can start saying, well, I'm going to do, for example, a paid campaign on a small subset, on a small target, well-defined of industry, geography, roles, whatnot. And I'm going to combine that with landing pages and SEO and content, and I'm going to combine that with some emails. If the people land on those landing pages and they sign up, then the emails will be personalized. And so now
Right.
it starts making sense from end to end.
And
That
to
that
yeah.
is the benefit on the conversion rate. That's
Right.
when you start having a lift. Okay.
Right.
And to do that, you need to be good at stacking, connecting pipes together.
Hmm.
Okay. Which is where I believe that's one of my skills is the ability to like take small tools, existing tools, and just like connect tools together so the data just like flows and you can create that experience.
Totally.
Um, in the how, that's what's funny is that you can start thinking, I had this win on that channel. Can I replicate some sort of that in another channel? Right? Can I use maybe the same audience, the same messaging, or can I use the same psychological hack or behavior on another channel? Okay, so that often is how I do it. But there's a lot of subtleties in each channel that you need to learn, you need to read, you need to learn from the channel.
Got it. Got it. And then when you have all these channels, right? So you would obviously think about having some channels to get those quick wins and having some channels to get those long term bets. So how do you identify the channels that can give you a quick wins versus how do you put put bets on channels that are for long term? So for example, SEO
Yep.
would be something is definitely long term, and
Yep.
versus like an ad would be something which is short term. So how do you identify these channels? What are the properties?
I don't have a channel approach.
Hmm.
I have an experiment approach. Each of my
Got it.
projects are listed in an Airtable database,
Hmm.
and I have an experimentation framework
Hmm.
where I list the time it takes,
Hmm.
the potential lift in revenue in dollars,
Hmm.
of course, the channel, the vertical, and all of those things. And I will have the team pick from the few experiments
Uh-huh.
that when you sort by revenue by day of work, they bubble at top. So I
Totally.
divide the potential revenue. So potential revenue is like, what is the lift multiplied by the chances of success? And then you divide that by the time to ship their experiments. Because what you want is the team to focus not on the
Mhm.
biggest win, not on the quickest win,
Right.
but on the whatever has the highest chance of maximizing their efficiency. So
Got
just
it.
like a worker in a factory, you want the line to move faster. My
Mhm.
line is experiments. I want my revenue per day of work to go up.
Totally.
That's what I measure.
Totally. And when you're measuring this, is have you ever like measured, or according to you, is virality the deus ex machina marketers can expect for their strategies?
Yeah, for sure. I implement that framework everywhere. Well, I implemented it at Drift, at Segments, and all the places, and it really helps the velocity. There's one thing that's I think important to understand is if you're doing growth, if we're talking of growth and marketing, right? There's really two types of teams, right? And you can say it's growth versus traditional. Like my mental split is: are you taking an experimental approach? Are you accepting that there's a high chance of failure?
Hmm.
Okay. Or are you working on a project which has to succeed? Let's
Right.
take two examples. A product launch is not an experiment. If you're
Yeah.
on the marketing side and you got to do the product launch, you got to make it work. You're not
Yeah.
going to say, "Oh, it didn't work. Let's pull the product off." That's not going to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so that's not an experiment. Okay. Um, so there's nothing to test. Okay. You got to do it the best way. Now, on the flip side, there's all the experiments, which things you can accept failure. And there, you got to take a high risk. Otherwise, you're not going to find the outliers. A growth team, a marketing growth team, is like a VC.
Mhm.
We are looking for outliers. If you find stuff that does plus 10, plus 20%, especially at the early stage, it's usually not statistically significant. Okay?
Got it.
So you're
Hmm.
making a lot of investments.
Hmm.
Like a VC, you're investing your time, okay, you're
Hmm.
investing to get returns. And the only way those returns are profitable is if you have outliers that generate 2x, 3x lifts. Okay? Because
Totally.
those are
Hmm.
clear lifts and those pay back all the failures. And so you're going to fail 70% of the time, 80% of the
Hmm.
time. Okay?
Hmm.
And so that framework is here to help you with the one metric that matters is how many experiments you can ship and what's your aggregate, let's say, uh, forecasted revenue that you have shipped in a given sprint.
That's really interesting to look at. And when you're attributing all these channels to revenue, right? So, and this is one of the questions that many of the people or many of the attendees today that have put that and it is I believe like it is one of the most common challenge which people would be facing with multiple channels, and that is attribution, right? So how do you solve this attribution challenge, right? Many people would use last attribution or last touch attribution or first touch attribution or multi-touch attribution where you're aggregating or distributing revenue percentage weightage to different channels. So like what have worked for you for different types of companies or different segments or different areas that you have worked
Yeah. Um, attribution tools are not a way to decide what has impacted the conversion. You're the one deciding that. You're creating a model, a Swish model, where you're putting the weight on first touch, on last touch, on middle touch. You can U shape it, W shape. You're the human deciding that. And then the model is going to say, okay, this should be the revenue.
Yeah.
There's just no way of saying, there's no way you can say, oh, sure, like I'm going to do a W touch because like data shows that it is what's impacting people the most. Because like, how, if Sunil converts, how do you know in the truth that the ad in the middle touch is what Sunil really to convert? Like you don't know
Totally.
at the individual level. You just don't know. So it's a good way to know. It's super useful to know what the customer experience is across all the touches. So you can understand what is the life cycle, what are the messages that has seen. It's great in sales-driven teams so that you can share with your sales team what ads, what messages, what copywriting this customer has seen. Okay, it is great at, and it's fantastic also to understand what channel is mostly used on first at the what drives the first touch, what drives the last touch. It's great, but you can't really say, you can't create causality if you want. All right, there's correlation, there's no causality.
Got it.
So I would be very, very cautious. I mean, you can do it when you're a large company and you have like you can control for a lot of variances, like if you're Snapchat and stuff like that, especially if your time to convert is short. But the smaller your volume is, and the more touches there are, less likely you are to be able to do like a good inference analysis. Like it's just probably not going to happen. So useful, but you won't be able to justify a channel just based on that.
Totally. And is it the same for any SaaS company as well, or there is some caveat here?
Yeah, for most SaaS companies. I was talking an hour ago for a company that has 1,500 employees, and they are doing first touch, and we talked to them and said, yeah, no, you're not there yet. It's not worth it for the moment. So as I suppose most people listening to the podcast are smaller than 1,500. Again, it depends what. It is useful, and I recommend them a tool to help the sales team understand the motions and understand the messages and the flow and the user flow. Just not to decide which channel drives the most conversions.
Totally. And now, like talking about something that, concerns the top management a lot, which is ROI, right? So how do you justify, like how can someone justify the ROI of a multi-channel marketing strategy, right? So how, like picking and choosing, like, as you said, like attribution is not the way to go about it. It will help you identify maybe what channels are working, what channels not. So how do you translate that into justifying the ROI? Like if some channels is not performing and you're getting a lot of touches on that, but then it is just humans to say that that channels is really doing great and we are converting a lot. But at the end of the day,
we self justify a lot of things by looking at the data. Like either first, of course, like when I push, like I'll cherry pick the data and I say, oh, yeah, sure, like this is working. Look at the data. Like it doesn't mean anything, but we'll all look at the numbers and we'll say, okay, but it doesn't mean anything. We'll just accept it. So I think there's the big difference. Like, what do we use because we need some kind of justification for what we already believe, right? Versus independently, like, is it scientifically sound? Going back to your question on multi-touch, it's very simple. It's like I don't need like a lot of research to tell you that if you touch a customer more often, you stay top of mind, and there's a higher chance that they convert. Okay, and so there's a curve that goes like that, and then it falls off a cliff if you really annoy them too much, right? And that is easy to analyze. Okay, so increasing the number of touches is good, especially as your sales cycle lengthens. The longer your sales cycle, the more you got to stay top of mind. Yeah.
And then like how do you pick and choose like what channels are not performing in that case? Like if we are having multi-touch and we are not really like we are attributing, but we like how do you identify in this case like if these are the channels that needs optimization, right, or something like that.
Yep. So I do small experiments on small controlled like audiences or geographies to see whether this channel in isolation works well. So you can do that. What's hard is when you want to look at this thing in combination with other channels. So for example, imagine you already have ads, you already have SEO, you already have emails, and you're wondering like, hey, should I send handwritten letters? Okay, or should I send gifts, for example? Now, you could, and most people do that. They're gonna pick an audience of like 500, and they're gonna cut it in two, and they're gonna send gift to 250, right? And they're gonna see if it has a lift.
Yeah.
And most likely they're gonna see a lift. And so then they're gonna generalize it to about audience, and that's also what I do, and that works well. Okay. Now, can you say, hey, we are driving, an extra 50K this month because we're sending gifts? That is debatable mathematically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because though you could say that on your sample you had a lift, and you can say you have an average lift, you don't know whether that's true on the total audience, and you definitely can't tell for a given person that this person converted, because this person is only in one audience. Either they got the gift or they didn't, right? So, for example, Sunil did not get the gift and did not convert. What does it mean? Would Sunil have converted if he had gotten the gift? You can't say.
No one knows.
You can't say, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting too.
And the problem is that when you have your sales team, then the sales team is gonna say, well, yeah, this is they didn't convert because of that, and it's true. You can't do attribution. You can't explain at the deal level. You can only do aggregate. So you can say in aggregate, and that's what I do. So my experiments work on aggregate. I say, well, on aggregate, for example, this new website, Drive Plus, I just shipped a website recently for Gorgias with my team, and with 2x conversion. 2x conversion, which is great, right? And so that's fantastic. Again, in aggregate, on a large number, we can see that. Individual number, the individual account, we can't say that they signed up because of that.
Totally. And so that's been an interesting discussion, right? And I think I've been asking too many questions, and we have a lot of questions that from the attendees.
Let's go.
So I'm gonna just switch on to that. Let me just. So they have put. Raj had a question, and he was asking like, what's the multi-channel strategy for products which are yet to find product market fit, right? Versus products who are product market fit.
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, the strategy for pre-product market fit, you're trying to find one channel that can scale towards product market fit. What that means is you're looking at something which has enough depth, okay? So not friends and family, not some small Facebook groups, like enough depth you can get to product market fit at a cost that you're comfortable with. Okay, and so that's why when you think on when I do due diligence for VCs and related analysis, and I see a CAC. If you're honest as an entrepreneur, the CAC always goes up as you scale, because you exhaust the channels that were the easiest and the most profitable first. And so when you pre-product market fit, that's what you're doing. You're fishing for the best first channel, which means you got to test, you got to iterate through all the channels very fast. And say, okay, is it going to be paid? Is it going to be SEO? Is it going to be like outbound emails? Is it going to be events? Okay, not events, not right now. Like, what is it going to be? Right? And in each channel, you got to do some enough tests that you can get it with confidence. Okay, it's not that. This is not going to work. Okay, it doesn't mean the channel is not good at all. It just means that pre-product market fit, there's no audience. And so if you want to take a step further there, if you're pre-product market fit, it means you're looking for early adopters. Okay. Where can you find early adopters? Okay. Generally, not on paid. Well, not on paid search. Maybe on paid social, but not on paid search, because early adopters are not looking for random things, and you are not something that they know about. So you're going to have to put the word out. So it is a channel which is kind of like awareness. You're going to have to put the word in front of potential early adopters. So you got to find, where are my early adopters? Examples of that are like, Kickstarter and Indiegogo is a good way, is a channel for early adopters. That's one. And
Yeah.
there's other channels like that.
Totally. And so I have one question which made me think about this. Like when you're talking about this thing, like multi-channel strategy for products which are pre-product market fit. So how do you get to, like so companies always focus on getting product market fit, but should companies or companies should also focus on getting product channel fit? Is that also something companies do focus on early stage, or is it like is it all three, like product market channel fit, right?
So I love Reforge's chart, and if you haven't seen it, go see like the product channel fit and all of
Yeah.
the angles on that chart.
Hmm.
If you're pre-product market fit, you generally have only one product.
Hmm.
Okay, and so the the the, the product market fit and the product channel fit is kind of the same thing. You kind of like looking at like, where can you find your early adopters, and can you get to them at a price that's reasonable. That's just what it is. That chart starts making sense when you have like multiple products and multiple channels, which you don't have yet.
Totally. Yeah. And so we have a question by Suhasini, and she's asking, what is the process of exploring new channels for SaaS acquisition? And I understand that this is a lot of experimentation, but do you have a framework to go about the process? And I think this was something that you talked about, you having an A template.
Yeah. And I can show quickly for those. I mean, there's unfortunately many people have seen in the past,
Mhm.
but I've shown this framework a couple of times already. This Airtable. I'm just gonna look in
Yeah.
my deck here if I can find it. There you go. So I have this thing here. Looks like this, where I have like all of the ideas I'm scoring, all of the projects, and then I have the team, I have the person who submitted it, I have the owner, the description, the hypothesis, um, and here you see here I have the revenue per day of work.
Right.
And if we go to the right, then I have like the confidence, whether it's recurring project or not, what's the average revenue, what's in time to build in days, which metric are we impacting here, right? And what's the opportunity? How many of those are we creating? And what's the increase of a baseline, right? And then you see all the metrics themselves have some values, right? So I
Mhm.
know the value for sign up, the value of a qualified sign up, the value for demo. If you go back here, then you see that we're pulling that numbers, the data here, to calculate the increase of a baseline and to calculate the weighted revenue, which takes into account the confidence. And then we divide this by the number of days, and we get to the revenue per day of work. Um,
Totally.
so
That's really interesting.
then I
Yeah.
think that the benefit here is then I can go to my boss and, at the end of the month, and the boss is going to ask things like, hey, G, like, what you working on next sprint or next month? And I says like, this is the list. So, oh, what's going to impact going to be? Well, if I sum the column, the weighted, so multiplied by risk factor, is going to be like, I don't know, like 200K, right? Um, and the boss can say, oh, okay, that's super cool, and like, who's doing what? I know who's doing what. And also, he can ask, well, what if I give you another engineer? And I said, well, now I have a backlog. I have
Uh-huh.
a backlog of maybe like 20 days of work, and I can unblock that if you give me another engineers. And what's the impact? Oh, I know exactly the impact, right?
Yeah.
And so I start having um, the ability to
Mhm.
forecast the impact of marketing teams, which is very rare. Right? I can forecast, and I'm handling that like a sales team, which is important because CEOs understand really well how sales team work. They have a pipeline of deals, some of which they will close, some of which they won't, and they need time to close the deals.
Yeah.
I'm a marketer, I do the same. I have a pipeline of projects, some of which will succeed, some of which won't, and I need
Yeah.
time and resources to close those experiments.
Totally. Yeah.
And because I report on dollars, on actual revenue, forecasted in actual revenue, like a pipeline,
Yeah.
this makes it really easy to understand.
Today, and this is an interesting approach, right? Like I could think of experiments as different deals, and not all deals will win. I'll lose some deals, I'll win some deals, and at the end of the day, it's going to impact the revenue. That's a really interesting takeaway. And so yeah, we have one question which is so how do you handle multi-channel budgeting?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question because that goes back to our attribution tools. So I recommend for most people to have a simple attribution logic. Okay, especially at the earlier stage. If I look at what I do for most of my early stage portfolio, I tell them, if your sales cycle is less than 2 weeks, go for a first touch. Okay, and take the first touch within a time frame, which is
Yeah.
the length of the time to close. And so you can take like 1.5x the median time to close, and that should be enough. And then if the opportunity has not closed, then you can just like close lost the opportunity. And if they come back, you start a new one with the new source. That's what I do at most companies. It works well. It's easy to identify who or which channel has sourced this opportunity in the past 2 weeks. Okay. And based on that, you can start doing, I'd say, some simple attribution. And you can start saying, well, I now will give a percentage, so basically a CAC to LTV target. Okay,
Yeah.
each of my channel have a CAC to LTV target. If we go back to like my specialty, what I do, what I love in SaaS, my way to differentiate is to create acquisition strategies that are have a $0 marginal cost.
Mhm.
That's important. Most traditional marketing teams have marketing motions and channels
Mhm.
where the CAC increases as the volume increases,
Mhm.
which means it does not scale well.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there's a negative incentive to scale it. The more you scale it, the more your CAC to LTV is going to get bad. Okay, and so that's a problem. Okay, so I'm looking
Totally.
for things where actually my CAC to LTV improves as I
Mhm.
scale. Examples of that are all the projects that I do that are engineering driven. I have a
Yeah.
high upfront cost. I'm paying for the cost of the engineers to build, I don't know, an
Yeah.
app or something to like drive acquisition. Once it's built, it runs for free.
Yeah.
Okay, content is a good example of something that has a $0 marginal cost. Okay, you build the content, but then eventually like people come and like you're no longer paying for that. Okay,
Yeah.
paid is the opposite. So I try to have that so that I have positive scaling effects.
Totally. So maybe have a balance between uh, channels which will invest now and which will give ROI later, and versus channels which I have to have nothing to invest in now but will still give me the ROI later, but the time frame is going to be a little longer than the first
Yeah,
first kind of channel. Yeah, so have a good balance, and that's how you can do budgeting. Yeah. So we have a great question from someone who's attending, Leo. And so he's asking, like, Leo was very keen to see your air table, and he's asking, like, in the air table, you had a column for confidence level. So how are you determining that percentage of confidence?
yeah. It's interesting because many people focus on that. It
Uh,
is not the biggest or the highest risk. Um, Generally, it's between 30 and 60%. I will talk to people who have done it. I will look at our past success rate. My Airtable has all of the past experiments, whether they failed or succeeded, and I will look at that to infer the success rate. But generally, between 30 and 60, which is only a 2x factor.
uh-huh.
The biggest risk in the Airtable is the time to ship,
Yeah.
because that requires engineers whatnot, and people are overly optimistic. And there, they're going to say, oh, I can ship this in 2 days. And in reality, they're going to take like 8 days. That's
Yeah.
like a 4x decrease in
Correct.
performance.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my problem, which is why I try to always incentivize financially, pay bonuses to my team based on their ability to ship revenue per day of work. Because revenue per day of work is impacted by the time it takes to ship.
Totally.
So that incentivizes you to go fast and do an MVP.
Totally. So yeah, that's the answer for you, Leo, and I hope it helps you. And we have one more question, which by Daniel. So he's asking, besides inconsistent messaging and broken pipes, what are some of the common rate that you have seen in multi-channel top of the funnel experiments that failed and the ones that succeeded?
Mm. Um, Generally, what happens is that we can't prove a lift. Like I'd say 8 times out of 10, the issue is that we
Uh-huh.
can't prove a lift with statistical confidence because the volume was too small.
Hmm.
And that is something we should have seen from the get-go. Very often, I catch my team pushing an experiment in the L table.
Hmm.
And a good example is they're going to say, oh, we're going to send, and I'm going to go back to Sarah with Alice and take the gift example. It's a great example for that. They can say, oh, we're going to send a small gift to, I don't know,
Hmm.
500 people, 200 people. Okay. And they're going to do that on such a small sample because it has a cost. And say, oh, we want to send like a $30 gift, and our budget is like maybe like $10,000. So like we can send like 300 people a $30 gift, right?
Yeah.
$9,000.
Hmm.
Okay. And I'm like, guys, like, can you calculate ahead of time what is the lift required to see significance?
Hmm.
And they haven't. And I look into it and say, guys, like, this is like, you need a huge lift for this to be statistically significant, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that people are bad at that. People will see a directional like plus 30% and say, oh, this is good enough. I'm like, no, it's random. On such a small sample, it's random. Okay. So especially if your conversion rate is already very low. So if you're trying to lift, for example, like imagine you have an outbound campaign which converts at 1% rate, and you're going to add for 300 people, you're going to add gifts, right? And you try to move it to 1.3. You won't see significance before you reach thousands and thousands. And you're not going to do thousands because that's too expensive. So you
Yeah.
probably should not have shipped that experiment. So the number one problem is that. The number one problem is that you're not forecasting ahead of time what is the required lift to get significance. And you should exclude that experiment if you can't commit to the volume.
Surely. I hope this answer your question, Daniel. And we have one question which is like, I liked it as well. So, how do you go on about picking the right touch points for your lead conversion? Again, something which talks about attribution, but then do you know, like, can you predict that, in some way by looking at your past data, that if this particular prospect goes through this particular touch point, you are highly confident that he'll convert. Again, it's talking about percentage and confidence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
I have data scientists, internal and external,
Mhm.
with whom I'm running some regressions, and we do see like some outlier effects. And so sometimes there are some touches that are like highly correlated uh, with converting. Again, keep in mind this is not causality; it's only correlation, and some
Yeah.
of those actually are uh, uh, um, just a showing an effect that is a consequence and not a cause. Okay.
Got it.
So you got to be careful about that. And if you want to have fun, you're wondering like, oh, how often does that really happen? For those that don't know, I would recommend going to the website's spurious correlations.
Mhm.
So you go to this. I'm going to show it right now. Give me a second. Well, that's a good
Yes.
example.
Hmm.
Can you enable screen share for me
Yeah,
again?
I did. I
There
did.
you go, my friend. So for example, here, this is a website that references all of the random correlations. For example, like suicides by hanging and US spending on science, right? Or people who drown flying in a pool and films of Nicolas Cage, right? And it's an algorithm that's taking public data and finding correlations, right? Like
Yeah.
cheese consumption and people who died by or being tangled in the sheets. And so this is tragic and funny in the same way. Like I love this one, divorce rate in Maine and capita consumption of margarine, which is a type of butter. Uh, but this should remind you, if you are in a business and you see a chart like that of
Yeah.
correlations and you see a 99.26 correlation, you can say, this is good. This is really good. Don't forget, you could
Yeah.
be correlating margarine with divorce rates.
Yeah.
Okay? That does not mean causality. Okay, there's at any business where you have a ton of data, especially these days, you're going to find correlations.
Hmm.
Okay, you have to. Okay,
Yeah.
you gotta dig deeper to understand, like, is this a legit correlation or not?
Yeah. At the end of the day, data will help you give the data, like it will get the data, but to make a decision, you have to have data plus your hunch. You have to follow your hunch as well.
Yeah.
You can't let your hunch go away and just trust data 100%. And yeah, I mean, we have covered most of the questions. There's one question by Sophie who's asking, is there a tool maybe you use to create that framework for prioritizing your growth ideas? I think G used Airtable, and you can use Airtable as well. That's a
So
pretty
there's a,
straightforward.
for those who asked, my friend Darius made a public version of that Airtable. It doesn't have the revenue, so you will have to customize part of it. But you can go to bit.li / I think it's Evelyn. Let me find it for you. Bit.li Evelyn table. It's he called it, there you go, experiment velocity engine. And if you type in Google like Evelyn Airtable, you'll bit.li / there you go, I found it. I'll post it here.
Yeah, for sure.
To everybody, to everyone. So you can go to this version. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and yeah, thanks a lot for sharing it. Yeah, I think we have covered most of the questions. Is there anyone who wanna show up, start on a video, say hi to G, and ask a question in the chat, in the attendees? Let's wait.
But put your videos on. Let's make it a big zoom.
Yeah. I think people are shy.
Well, yeah, we will always say, of course.
Oh yeah. I have one more. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. So yeah, I have like maybe one last question from me. Then people who asked like when they fill the form, any recommendations for budget and attribution best practices for multi-channel campaigns,
Yep.
and what metrics do you
Yep.
justify?
Yeah.
Do you use to justify the spend on multi-channel campaigns?
So two things: you should leverage a tool. So for those who don't, like, you should use GA as a start. There's great attribution models in GA, but it does not connect to your B2B Saas stack. I recommend two small tools. I suppose most people here are like small companies with limited budgets. So two small tools you can look at, and you can tell them that you're coming from me to get good treatment. The first one is Attribution App. Pretty cool. Connects with Segment, with HubSpot or Salesforce. And it enables you to paint the picture of the flow. That's pretty cool. And the other one is Dream Data that I'm using at Gorgias. And it has a really good attribution model for accounts with multiple users. So it can create an attribution model at the user level or at the account level, or both, and then you can see multi-touch of all the people in the account, which is really cool. So you can spread, you can see the picture of like all the people who came first, who came second, and which of their individual paths. Here.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I think last question is by Varun. He's asking, in multi-channel strategy, like distribution and repurposing of content is really important as well. Since you have multiple channels, there are multiple types of content. So what content strategy you would say is good for B2B SaaS companies?
Yeah, I think the one thing that works the best is leveraging the fact that there are multiple channels to test a lot of content at the same time, okay, and see which one is getting traction, okay, and then repurposing that one across all the other channels. You gotta think like, you don't know what's gonna work. You're a scientist doing experiments, and you've got to go faster. The only way you can do that is by spreading out, right? And like launching all of those like little torpedoes to test like what's going to work, or maybe a more positive word is a fishing line if you're not a fish. And then once you find something, then you can double down on other channels. Okay, a lot of people do that. If you actually observe, they're going to test something on Twitter, and then they're going to take the Twitter success with the highest upvotes and post it on LinkedIn. And they're going to do the opposite, take the LinkedIn stuff and post it on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So you just got to like monitor what's picking up speed really, really quickly, and then cross post really fast. the speed is critical here.
Totally. And we have two more questions. So those are coming in. So we have Leo asking, have you seen any what pitfalls have you seen in experiments using paid marketing channels in lower funnel, like bottom of the funnel activities?
So
Come on,
the
yeah,
problem,
they can ask you
the,
questions live.
the problem about that is it's easy to cheat. If you start doing if you start doing multi-touch attribution, and if you start doing especially like last touch attribution, and I'm the guy in charge of paid, I have a high incentive at just blasting all of your accounts with an ad so that I get credit.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the issue. I have a negative incentive, well, negative when it comes to the user experience. So the pitfall is that paid is annoying, especially if the people are already engaged. Okay? For example, like I give you an example. I paid for QuickBooks, which is an accounting software, okay, from Intuit, and I use it, right? And then I get served ads with like 30% discount. I'm pissed. Of course I'm pissed, right? And the right thing is they should have excluded me. And now they have issues like excluding whatnot, but like, and if you're already in a sales discussion, like you got to control the messaging and make sure your exclusions are really good. You don't want to be pushing like top of funnel content to mid or bottom of funnel deals.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Totally. Yeah, we have one great question by Elizabeth. So hey, Elizabeth, feel free to turn on your video and ask your question. Yeah, there she goes.
Elizabeth's here. We have a brave soul. You probably want to unmute her. There you go. Hey.
Hello. Yeah, so I wanted to ask, you were talking about attribution models earlier. You mentioned if your sales cycle is less than 2 weeks, like first touch is a good model. And so I was just curious if you had recommendations. You know, B2B companies sometimes have much longer sales cycles of months or years. And so if you have a different method that you would recommend for them.
Yeah, for sure. The first thing is if you stretch into years, then there are a lot of other issues, because generally what's going to happen is that you're going to cycle through champions or potential buyers, right? So your executive buyer is going to change. The mean tenure of your champion in a given role is going to be like 12 to 18 months. After that, either they get out of the company or they change into a different role and they're no longer the right champion. And that causes a lot of issues, because then like, how do you take that into account? Right? Is it the same deal? Is it a different deal? If we exclude the outlier of multiple years, which is like really high in enterprise, and for what it's worth at the high in enterprise, generally you don't care, because the revenue is so high that the cost of the ads is irrelevant anyways. Okay, so if you go like mid-tier, like a couple of months, and my experiences at Drift and Segment are all relevant there. When you start having that, you're gonna do, I'd say, you're gonna have multiple approaches. I'm gonna do attribution for stuff that costs me money, that I want to measure the return on investment, and I'm gonna be a bit more stringent there. And say, oh, okay, like I'm looking at like my paid channel, and like I'm looking at that, I'm gonna be a bit more stringent on like what's your ability to source, and I'm gonna look both first touch and all influenced. That's what I did. I had two metrics. One was like, how much revenue am I able to source with, I'm the first source of that revenue. And then what's the total revenue influenced? And my goal was to influence over 70% of the total revenue of the company, and to source at least 20% of the revenue. Okay, it's a simplified model. It's just like, how much am I touching? How much am I sourcing? Okay, when I tried doing other more complicated models, I was saying, oh, like, but I'm the one who touched this like the most, and like this thing, that, it's like I never could get the buy-in from the rest of the company to justify that. It felt like I was just trying to do some land grabbing, like just justify that I owned more revenue, which it was a bit. So
Awesome. And yeah, we have like last 9 minutes with G. If you guys have any more questions, you can ask. Go ahead.
I Daniel who's connected, and maybe Daniel had a question.
Hello.
Cool.
Good to see you again. Yeah, so I want to go back to, like generating like demand through top of funnel when you're using multi-channels. I was wondering like if you have like past experiences that can point to like the success of those things, especially in the context of us being in a like a more depressed economic outlook, right? Like a lot things aren't necessarily where it's like you don't need to be a scientist to know that if you show ads more often, people are more likely to think of you. But is there a additional step that you can take beyond showing that impression that's really going to help people to say, oh, like I need this right now?
Yeah. So
or like to engage in conversation.
For sure.
With you. Yeah.
I think now more than ever, I think this is a great question to end the webinar on. Now more than ever, we need to look more carefully at who's the audience that we're engaging with. And my belief is that when we do multi-touch channels and we do multi-distribution, we have a lot of time the wrong assumption. We're coming from the wrong angle, which is, oh, I have a total population that is huge. I'm just going to blast everyone. I'm going to see which channels work well, and then I'm going to double down on that. The truth is, there is a population, and within that population, there's a small subset who is willing to buy right now if they have, the right message. And there's a population who, like, you might think they're the right buyers, but they're not willing to buy. And no amount of ads is going to make them buy. Okay? And you got to figure out who's who so that you can focus your investments and increase investments on the small subset who is willing. Okay? And that's what I've been doing the past couple of years, which is like looking at data before people engage with my content and buying data from third parties and like buying like G2 intent data, buying Bombora data, looking at if you look at B2B, like who's hiring, which companies are doing well, okay? And understand like, okay, let's refine. And if you think of about it, what it is it's a mass scale ABM strategy. Whereas ABM was to say, oh, I'm going to take a set list of accounts that are really good. I'm going to try to convert those. I'm saying I have a big market. Within that market, at any given time, there's a small subset who's expressing buying intent or the ability to buy. And I'll focus just on that. And I will 10x my budget on those so that I can blast my competitors throughout the space. Okay? Because they will have an average spend, which is much lower, because they will distribute their budget on a broad audience where I was focused my budget on a small audience. But I'm not an ABM guy. I'm not going to say it's a set list of accounts. I'm just saying right now, which are the companies that are expressing buying behaviors? I'm doing like then some correlation analysis to say, is hiring the good signal? Is it because you're hiring somebody? Is it because you change technologies? Is it because you are looking at tools on T2 Crowd? Like there's a lot of different signals. And I feed that into all of my channels as a source of like, who should we target? Okay, and that is how I do it. And if you look at the IAB data for advertising in March and April, you see that advertisers are actually shifting away from national display and broad deals to programmatic, which is exactly that. Okay, so they're doing there's a huge budget shift towards that to improve your CAC LTV. When we're in a depressed economic situation, we just try to go for profitability and improve our CAC LTV.
How do you improve like the mood though? Like, so say like, like maybe in normal circumstances, I have the intent and appetite to buy an ice cream, but I've been watching the news and it's just like not in my mind right now to go out and buy an ice cream. How would you be able to remind or nudge them in the right direction? So like, your emotional or mental context changes that you realize that you are actually in the mind space for that.
For sure. So obviously my strategy works better for B2B than for B2C. And especially because on B2C, the signals are weak. And you might not be allowed to use them for privacy reasons. And the other thing is that what you just said assumes that there are there's all people in the segments are depressed. My theory is that there are some people who are, some people who aren't. And I try to figure out who's doing really well right now. For example, if you look into my portfolio, one of the companies, Gorgias, is doing extremely well. We didn't know, but e-commerce is booming big time, which means everybody related to booming categories is doing very well. Can you extract information? Which industries, which jobs, which cities, if you're in B2C, are doing really well right now? Can you focus your efforts there? Okay. So if you're selling, for example, I know people who are selling like very broad and wide services to any kind of company. I told them, like, don't try to sell extra SaaS to people who are firing half of their staff unless you're helping them save more money, because spending more money is not the top concern right now. Whatever you promise, they have other problems. Okay. However, those that have 2x, 3x the leads, the volume, and that can't cope with that and are creating crappy customer experience, they are dying for something to help them. If you can help them, you don't even need the pitch. Okay.
Right.
So try to figure out like where's the market trend and position yourself in those trends.
Awesome. I think this is a great note to end with. Yeah, and thanks Daniel and Elizabeth, coming and asking those great questions. And thanks a lot, G, for coming and doing this webinar, podcast, and AMA with us. It's a bunch of everything.
Cool.